Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Today is Friday, January 31st, 2025. It is the second of the month of Shvat, the second of the month, the lunar month of Shvat. So what that means is that right now the moon is 2 days old. We're at 7% of a waxing moon, so a crescent moon. Today, the in the appearing in the sky tonight. Probably won't be able to see anything tonight, but tonight we have the moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in the sky tonight. Um, Also, the Willamette River is flowing at 16,000 cubic feet per second, which is below the norm. The low on this date was again in 1977. Must have been a rough year when the river was only at 4,950 cubic feet per second, and the high was in 1965 at 171,000 cubic feet per second. So it is below the mean and below the median. It's actually below the 25th percentile right now. This week's parasha is Parashat Bo from the book of Exodus, from the book of Shemot. It is the third parasha of the book of Exodus. Classical theological question that comes up from this week's parasha um, is around the question of free will. So the Torah says in several different ways um, that God is involved, or is involved with hardening Pharaoh's heart and preventing Pharaoh from just releasing the Israelites. And I wanted to talk about that today from a more psychological perspective, and in terms of and as well as a practice related to a practice of our own practice of increasing our midah, or increasing the quality of self-reflection, and being true to the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination within us. So there are at least three words that are used in Hebrew to describe how God affects Pharaoh's heart, in Pharaoh refusing to let the Israelites go. So one of them says Va'ani akshe et lev paro vehirbeti et ototai ve'et moftai be'eretz Mitzrayim. For I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Mitzrayim. Akshe, I will harden. So literally, kashe does mean hard or difficult. In another verse, it says, "Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, bo el Paro, ki ani hichbadeti et libo ve'et lev avadav lema'an shiti ototai ele bekirbo." Then Hashem said to Moshe, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them." And there, the word for that is translated as hardened is hichbadati, which comes from the same root that means to honor, to glory, to respect, kavod. Hichbadati. It also means to make heavy. It also is related to the word for liver. So and the last verb that's used to describe how God affects Pharaoh's heart, it says, "Vaychazek Adonai et lev Paro velo shilach et bnei Yisrael." But Hashem stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. And there, the shorish Vaychazek Adonai et lev Paro, the word chazek is the word for to make strong, to make powerful, to give strength. So chazak, 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 v'nit chazek, we say at the end of every book of the Torah, and when we finish a book of the Torah at synagogue. And the phrase means be strong, and we will increase our strength. So all three of these verbs are used in relationship to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. One of the challenges, for some reason, with our particular scriptural tradition, whether it's through the lens of much of traditional Judaism or through the way that Christians and apparently sometimes Muslims look at our texts, is that there's a failure to understand something really basic about mythology when you are looking at these texts. So we know, for example, all of us think of, for example, Greek mythology, and we understand the gods to be personifications of aspects of human experience, aspects of personal and national aspirations, aspects of what causes peace in the world, what causes suffering in the world. These are all personifications of these elements as well as elements of nature. In Judaism, as a monotheistic religion, all of that personification was collapsed into one God. So there is one God that is the personification of everything. For some reason, when it comes to the Bible, we have a very hard time, even though our tradition tells us explicitly um, many times over, including the Tanakh, we take those anthropomorphisms and those personifications literally. We take them to mean that in some way, God is a human, is very human-like, has human qualities, even though we somehow appreciate the theology, for example, of the Rambam, who said that any human characteristic that you see attributed to God in Tanakh is metaphorical and can only be understood as metaphor. And if you mistakenly think it is literally describing aspects of God, you are committing a kind of theological sin, that God has no body and no corporeal reality at all. God does not resemble a human being at all in any sense. So we appreciate this theology, and yet when many people read the Tanakh, they have a problem with the quote unquote theology of the Tanakh, which is to say what they're seeing in the Tanakh is an anthropomorphism of God, and that somehow is just sort of like a stone cold fact for people. And yet, you can read the entire text quite easily as understanding that God, the character of God in the Tanakh and the Torah, is a character, that is to say, a personification of many of different aspects of human experience, different aspects of life here on earth. So when you read this story about the exodus from Egypt and the plagues in the Tanakh, you can understand God as a manifestation, as a personification of conscience, of justice. So what I wanted to share with you today is there's a book that I just completed called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. And what they propose is very convincing to me because I experience this as reality, as true within myself and my own experiences. What they say is essentially that most conflict begins with self-deception. It begins with a self-betrayal. They give the example of a similar example. I'll make my own variation on it. But you're sitting on a bus and someone gets on the bus. You've got a seat by yourself. Other people have seats by themselves. Other people are sitting in pairs. And you don't want to sit with someone. But you see this person in the story. It's an elderly person getting on the bus and beginning to look for a seat. And so you have this moment where you recognize that person needs a seat. I should offer them a seat. But because you feel that you you're also uncomfortable with that idea, you don't know this person, you want a whole seat to yourself, you want your privacy, you sort of move your bag over and make it look as if you are the seat is occupied or you don't have space. The self-betrayal happens in that moment where at first you see a person and you see their need. You see a person and you see their need. Then immediately there is a process that we go through to sort of justify our needs. Once we start that process of trying to justify our needs, we will go to great lengths to prop up and support that the rationale we are giving ourselves for not simply doing what our heart and mind originally felt was, oh my gosh, there's someone coming toward me, they need a seat. I should offer them a seat. They need a seat. So there's this moment in which you see them as a human being, as a person with a need. And then you start wanting your needs to be justified. People will go to extreme lengths to justify the rationalizations they have for protecting their own needs. They'll go very far. And so eventually on larger scales and smaller scales within organizations, within nations, within families, you then start seeking allies to corroborate your views. So when God, as an embodiment, as a personification, as a character representing conscience, hardens Pharaoh's heart, the implication is that Pharaoh's heart had to be hardened to continue to refuse to let all of these slaves go. The implication is that at first, in the heart of Pharaoh, is a knowledge that enslaving people is not okay, and that the way the Israelites have been treated is not okay. But he then goes through this whole process of justifying why he should treat the Israelites harshly. So he begins by saying, let's deal harshly with these people because, or let's deal wisely with these people because they've grown numerous, they're very powerful, they are now an internal threat. So the shift there is that Pharaoh starts seeing himself as the victim, as the justified victim, and then goes to great lengths, including harming many people, many people in Mitzrayim, to through his ongoing justification that he is in the right and they are in the wrong. But at the beginning, it is his awareness, is his awareness in his body that actually what is happening to the Israelites, what he has done to the Israelites, the oppression of the Israelites is not okay. This is how it begins. So when this personification of God comes and says these different phrases, "V'ani akshe et lev paro," I will harden Pharaoh's heart, or "Ki ani hichbadati et libo ve'et lev avada," that I will the word for that strange use of the word to glorify, to honor, to respect, or to make heavy. I will make heavy Pharaoh's heart. I will weigh it down. I will block it up. Or the last one, Vaychazek Adonai et lev paro, that Hashem made Pharaoh's heart brazenly strong. These are all descriptions of things that happen within all of us when we go through this process of justifying behavior that on some level we know, on a deep level we know is not correct. We know it's not correct because we're not actually seeing or attending to the needs of other people, which which might be our very first instinct. Or another classic example is you're approaching someone who you know is going to be asking you for money. And in that moment, you might have a desire, an initial desire to give to them. But in this metaphor, God, the the personification of your own values, the personification of seeing other people, the ethic and the instinct of seeing other people as human beings, as needs. God shows up and starts challenging the desire of you that for your personal reasons or your personal concerns, you don't want to help this person. And then you start justifying, okay, if I give this person money, they're just going to use it on alcohol. They're just going to squander it. It's my money is not going to help them, or I don't want the discomfort of talking to this person. I don't want the indignity of giving something to giving money to someone in need. All of those things that we justify, and then you find yourself crossing the street and so forth, and then oftentimes we build up these narratives of like, that's just an addict. It's someone who, it's not, you know all these justifications that we give. I wish Salem would get rid of all these homeless people downtown. They're such a nuisance and an eyesore, and why should I have to deal with this? Like, I work hard, I have a family, all the justifications that we do. So in those acts, it is to us then that Hashem, that God is hardening our hearts, or making our hearts heavy, or strengthening our hearts, which is to say that the way that God functions is originally there is that holy impulse, but then as you resist the holy impulse to help someone, God, because God is still everything, quote unquote, makes your heart hard. It is as if God is the voice in you that's saying that person needs the change in my pocket, needs a meal, like, whatever you could do, is the initial calling of God. Let my people go. Let my people go that they serve me in the wilderness. And the response of the heart then, once it starts seeking its own glory, starts seeking its own honor, starts seeking starts seeking its own justifications for not doing that, becomes hardened. So the idea is not then that God manipulates the heart to become hard. It's that by resisting that initial impulse, the very same impulse becomes the driver, becomes the fuel, that becomes the tension by which you end up justifying not doing what your original impulse is. And how does that then apply to these verses, the extent of the rest of the verse that says, um, that I want to harden Pharaoh's heart, or I will harden Pharaoh's heart, which is to say, the conscience of Pharaoh, knowing that he should let the slaves go, that slavery is not right, knowing um, that and having that explicitly be stated, not just in your own heart, but explicitly stated by the mouth of Moses and Aaron, triggers all of these responses to go into defensive mode. Right there is a shift in um, that the Arbinger Institute calls self-betrayal. So that's where it starts, is that moment of self-betrayal where you stop seeing the other person as another person with needs, but instead see them as sort of an object that is distressing you, or and begin to start seeing yourself somehow as the victim. So when it says in the rest of the verse that God will multiply, is going to make this happen in order to multiply the signs and wonders on the part of God, it is to say, from this understanding of God, it's sort of like this is what happens on a karmic level. This is what happens. This is how you start seeing the power that and the presence that is God in the world, either for good or for bad, because it is the consequences of people not seeing each other for the needs that they have, seeing them as other people, and that has significant consequences within organizations, within communities, within cities, within nations. So we often, we often, there, you know, many people struggle with the text as it is written as a theological problem about free will. You know, is God manipulating Pharaoh? And I think that's totally missing what's happening in the story and missing the fact that this is mythology. You take this seriously not because it's a story about something that may or may not have happened 3,500 years ago, but rather it's a story about something that happens over and over and over again. So we read these stories and we study these stories in order to inspire within us profound questions about how we might behave like Pharaoh, to inspire an understanding of why other people may behave like Pharaoh in different circumstances, so that we can have a fuller understanding of human beings and have a fuller understanding of ourselves. And with that fuller understanding, make better and more careful moral and ethical decisions. Shabbos, everyone.